I'm here for something else.
Anyway, hello everyone, and welcome back to another review episode. I'm sorry it's been a while since I've uploaded or recorded a review episode, but since I was busy, and also during December, I started a podcast, which will be in the description below, which is why I haven't been uploading in a while. But in this episode, I'm going to do something different. Since I'm going to be reviewing Season 3 of A Million Little Things, as the show I've already reviewed the first 2 seasons. It'll be in the description below as always. So in this episode, I'll be ranking every episode, which is 18 episodes, and I'll be summarizing the episode prior to it. As I mentioned, I started a podcast. In this podcast, I do a review of A Million Little Things in each episode with a co-host who hasn't seen the show, who gives the opinions, and yeah, we've done it. But since it was kind of short for the first 13, 14 episodes, we started to invite guests so that we could ask a question about this a main theme in that episode, so that we could get a little bit more personal with the podcast. We already have the first season already in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, but I also did start a YouTube channel for the podcast recently where I'm uploading it. We'll start season 2 quite soon, but yeah, so please subscribe, and if you want to listen to the podcast, please listen to it too. Spoiler warning is always in action, if you haven't seen the season 3 of A Million Little Things, I think you should. So yeah, please do watch it before you do. This season of A Million Little Things was very easier to relate, and it had some surprising moments, which was really nice. There were a little bit of harder episodes to watch in this season, but which made it a little bit more realistic. Due to the COVID thing, everything was changed from season 2, and COVID was integrated into the season. It was like a main character basically, so it was a really nice thing to see how other people who isn't like us to be portrayed in TV to suffer COVID, which really did help the authenticity. The storyline for each character was really brilliantly crafted. I was disappointed that Delilah wasn't in that much of the episode, but I understand that the actress had to go to take care of her family, so the way that she was used was really good. And the other character storyline also was relatable for many people, and it was emotional to give this attention to each character in this very authentic way, which was really nice. So I'm gonna start summarizing what happened in season 3, and then I'm gonna rank the season basically. So stay tuned. For Eddie, he survives the crash, or the car crash, hit and run, but he is in a wheelchair now, paralyzed. But the good thing is he learns what happens to Alex, which is the main reason why he got hit by a car. But by doing so, his family relationship is really complicated now, because Eddie starts taking pills now, and Catherine and Eddie's relationship becomes really bad, which forces Catherine to ask for a divorce, with Eddie not getting child custody of Theo, which is really the shocking part of this family arc. But by the end of the season, they hash it together for a mutual agreement of a divorce deal, which is a really nice ending for them. Delilah, as I mentioned, wasn't in that much of the episode due to in the story, Delilah goes to France, taking her dad with her, and she stays in France for most of the season. But whenever she returns, the story is really nice, and the hole that wasn't filled, the hole is filled within the group basically. Darcy, the new character, portrayed by Florina Lima from season 2's, was a recurring character. Struggles with PTSD since she was a soldier. She's also, dating Gary after Gary broke up with Maggie in season 2, and Darcy starts to trust Gary even more and more as their relationship continues. For Gary, Gary's father is introduced, and we learn a little bit of a history of him changing his name from Javier to Gary. And Gary moves into the Dixon house to be the guardian while Delilah is gone to take care of Sophie and Danny. But this season, Gary feels a little bit helpless. He can't help but the things that happens around his friends, and so it's a little bit. He has a very difficult arc in this season. For Maggie, Maggie went to England in the arrives in England in the first episode, and starts a relationship with her roommate and gets pregnant. Yes, but she gets pregnant, but she decides to get an abortion because she just got chemo, and it's not healthy. But so yeah, and she also starts a podcast, which is a important part of her arc basically. Regina and Rome, they're the happy couple most of the season. Regina and Rome, at the beginning they failed to adopt the baby because of COVID, and they couldn't have kids in the show, even though that was gonna be the arc, but it happens, and their relationship becomes a little bit fractured because they couldn't get the kid. Regina's also having problems with her restaurant because of COVID. No one's going to come in because of COVID, and they're afraid. So that's the problem that Regina's facing. But by the end of the season, Regina and Rome decides to adopt Tyrell. Tyrell is a 17-year-old teenager that whose mom got deported, and Rome and Regina decides to help the kid out and become a little bit closer like a family. Sophie has a very difficult arc this season where she gets sexually assaulted or harassed by her guitar tutor, and she kind of have a PTSD kind of denial moment. Sophie also tries to get justice for this because the guitar tutor throughout the season we learned that this guitar tutor did it to another student who committed suicide. So Sophie tries to get justice in this season. And for Danny has a small arc, but it's a good arc where Danny comes out at school. So finally he comes out, which is, that's the summary of the characters that's in the show. Number 17, Trust Me. Now, I'm not saying that this episode is bad. In my opinion, this episode is very difficult to watch rather than bad, as this is the episode where Sophie gets sexually exploited, and Gary feels helpless in this episode. As in the beginning of the episode, Gary tries to search for Sophie, and because Sophie has been sneaking out of the house, which you should never do during COVID times, and Gary finally learns about Sophie's guitar tutor exploiting her, which causes him to call both Regina and Maggie to psychologically help Sophie go through this event that she had experienced. And in my opinion, it's a really nice moment, but it's really hard to watch as Sophie struggles and has to deal with this creep that exploited her while teaching guitar. And even the guitar teacher said this is normal because I've done it to another student, and so Sophie lets her guard down. But this episode, after it's finished, after he's exploited and Sophie is talking to Regina and Maggie, Gary can't do anything. Maggie tells her that you can't help her with this because you don't know what she went through, and Gary is the fixer of this group, and he wants to help everyone like he did with Maggie and Darcy, but in this situation it's really hard to do, and it's really difficult. So it's really difficult to watch this episode, but the way Lizzie Green portrayed Sophie in this episode was brilliant, as she really brought that true vulnerability to her character that she had to face while she was with the guitar tutor, and also with the aftermath of her feeling like a cracked shell, and she tries to talk about it to Regina and Maggie, but it's a little bit difficult to do so. She has to do it in her own terms. So it's in my opinion, this episode is great, but it's a really hard episode to watch. Number 16, Listen, episode 13. I mean, this episode is also a hard episode to talk about, as this episode is the primary episode for the Black Lives Matter protest episode, and it was hard watching it, as it's a really realistic episode like the previous episode, which is why these two are at the end, because it's a little bit hard to. It's a good episode, but it's a little bit hard to talk about, as it is without being controversial. Though this episode was better than the previous episode, because it had a little bit more of a group unity, unlike the previous episode where it was Sophie and Maggie, Regina, Gary. This episode had everyone protesting except for a couple of the group, like Rome. But this episode is also a key point where Regina is injured during the protest, and this causes Rome to be worried about Regina a little bit more. So that's a good thing. This episode talks about the harshness and the difficulties of this protest during a COVID time. So, and the fact that it's a movement where this episode leads to a documentary that Rome is going to create. It's a really good starting episode, in my opinion. Number 15, The Talk, episode 4. The winter finale of the season was a little bit it was good, but it wasn't as good as the other episodes. This episode explores the beginning of Sophie's sexual assault, where Sophie auditions to be a tutor, to the tutor that who eventually sexually assaults her, and in this part, the tutor basically turns it down, and then Sophie goes through this trial phase where she just performs on the street, which the tutor miraculously runs into with his wife, and that's why Sophie gets the one-on-one tutoring, and that's a little bit of a foreshadowing of what happens in the number 17 episode 10, where Sophie gets sexually assaulted. So if you know what's coming, then it's a little bit difficult to watch this episode. But yeah, the other part that's this arc is for Darcy, where she suffers from PTSD, having nightmares. But since she doesn't fully trust Gary at this moment. Darcy doesn't tell Gary what she experienced during her time as a soldier, But so in the end, Gary basically does the worst thing and calls Maggie for help as a therapist, because of the fact that Gary can't handle Darcy's nightmare every single night. And also the fact that they're living in the Dixon house, the scream is heard by Sophie and Danny, and they can't sleep either. So this episode is a really simple episode that it was an okay episode, I guess, that brings continuity to the show, the series. Number 14, Timing, episode 7. I'm just gonna say it straight away. Every episode of A Million Little Things this season was really good. It's just that it's somewhat hard to talk about, like the episode 17 and 16, and some episodes are slightly disappointing in my opinion, and this is one of them. Obviously, this episode has Eddie lying to Catherine about his going off the wagon, taking pills, and his sobriety's off again after 10 years. Eddie is getting his drugs from Dakota, and which means Dakota and Eddie are hanging out more often, which means while Eddie's taking care of Theo, Dakota starts interacting with Theo, which does get a really bad ending by the end of the episode. Meanwhile, Catherine has no idea about Eddie going losing his sobriety, and is making deals with Alan because of COVID, and they need stuff or materials to survive, like eggs and toilet paper. So Catherine and Alan starts to trade stuff. Yeah, and by the end of the episode, Catherine finds out about the pills, and instead of Eddie taking standing up and saying it's mine, she doesn't do that, and Dakota takes the fall, which is really bad for Theo too, because Dakota was helping Theo a little bit. And for Maggie's storyline with Jamie, it's a really nice, I guess, where, well, it's complicated, where Jamie finds the ring that Gary was going to use to propose to Maggie, and Maggie has to come out saying that they were a couple, but they are strong still, but because Maggie's pregnant, so they have to accelerate the storyline or the relationship of these two. But the too good part about this episode, was Rome and Regina's storyline, where they start helping Tyrell and other kids to give sandwiches to them, because during COVID, kids are struggling as much as the adults do, and this in turn allows Tyrell to give back to Regina and the restaurant by promoting the restaurant by using social media. And Gary has a really good time with Darcy and her son, where Darcy's son also suffers germaphobe like Gary, apparently. We learned in this episode, where Gary talks to Darcy's son about it's okay to be afraid of touching people and washing hands a lot, but you can't trust me because I'm the cleanest person, which in turn allows Darcy to start trusting Gary even more and more, which allows Darcy to open up about the time when she was a soldier, and yeah, so they become a lot closer, as Gary finally knows what happened to Darcy, and why she's having all these PTSD nightmares. Number 13, United Front. Episode 14. This episode's a very disappointing episode, because I support the Seville family, and they're getting divorced, and in this episode they're telling Theo about the divorce, and it's very sad in this episode, in my opinion. So basically, Eddie and Catherine has to gently tell Theo that they're getting divorced, and Gary and Darcy helps them because those two had splitting parents. So they try to ease the situation, but Theo finds out in a very unusual quickly before Catherine and Eddie could tell them, and he gets really disappointed and worried. By the end of the episode, Eddie's becoming concerned, because he believes that he's not going to get custody of Theo because of his drug addiction. And even though this episode takes place after the sobriety episode, it's a very harsh thing to see. This episode also has Sophie's storyline, where she returns from France, and basically, she's still struggling from this thing that has happened to her, where she was sexually assaulted, and this is a storyline where she is comforted by many people, but she has to do something in order to get out of the shell that she has created right now. And in this episode, she also learns by going to her dream university that a person who was being taught by the tutor committed suicide. And until this point, Sophie thought that it was a male student that the tutor did it with, until she learns that this person might also be involved might have been sexually assaulted, which is why she could have committed suicide as the season ends. This is her storyline and arc, which is a really nice one. And finally, the other storyline is where Regina's mom and Rome's father's girlfriend, I guess, starts to get along because of the same age. But Regina never had a African American mother because her mother was white, and in this episode, there's two yin yang, I guess, and by the end of the episode, they get along really well, which makes Regina happy, and they cook in the restaurant, eat and celebrate, I guess, which is a really nice thing to see in this episode because of the other two darkness that we see. Number 12, Redefine, episode 11. This episode has a lot of redefining for many characters in the episode. In the beginning, there's a call from Delilah and says her flight's been delayed because of COVID again. It's very difficult for Delilah to come back, and also the fact that the actress Stephanie Sojak is not returning this season, or is taking a hiatus because of COVID, so it's a bit difficult for her to appear. There's a redefinement for Catherine and Eddie's relationship as Catherine starts to fall in love with Alan while Eddie is in rehab, and also but in this episode Eddie is able to see Theo and Catherine, well, mainly because of Theo's acting out, because Theo does blame Catherine for Eddie's addiction. Another redefinement happening is in Regina and Rome's relationship with Tyrell, where Regina and Rome offers their spare room to Tyrell until they're able to get until Tyrell is able to reunite with their mother. Tyrell is very happy that he has a place to stay, which is really nice. The main crucial moment of this episode is obviously Sophie after suffering her attack or sexual assault, and she has still having trauma, and when she does do the audition to get into a dream university by playing the guitar, she starts to have the flashback, which leads to her closing her computer and storming off, while even though Gary tried to do a good job to convince her that you can't let this monster take your life away, which is a nice moment for Gary, who is always the father figure after John died, so which is nice. This episode ends with Sophie leaving for France, and Sophie needs some break from her current lifestyle. With her, everything she sees is causing trauma. It's very difficult for her, and when she leaves, Gary is watching, bye-bye, and then after that Gary punches the car, knowing that he feels helpless and he can't do anything, which is something he struggles within this season, which is very interesting to see. Number 11, Miles Apart, episode 6. There's 3 arcs in this episode. One of them, Eddie, the second one, Maggie, and the third one, Roman Regina's. And Roman Regina's is one of the best arcs in the season, in my opinion, where Tyrell is first introduced in this episode, where Tyrell goes to Regina's restaurant and acts like a delivery person who delivers all the food, and when Roman and Regina finds out that their food was stolen, or so it seemed, they start to freak out, because this is Rome's first day at Regina's shop or restaurant, because of the fact that Rome lost his movie deal because of COVID. So the Rome has been started going depressed, but the good thing is Regina has a job, offers Rome a job, and that's how Rome gets back up and they meet this future adopted this future kid that they're gonna adopt in the end, Tyrell, which is really nice in my opinion, to see how all three of them, well, Roman, Tyrell especially, all three of them are really really getting along really well. Maggie's arc is a little bit difficult because it's about abortion, and abortion is very, very controversial in many parts of the world. But this is not a surprising one because of the fact that she just got chemo, and if she did decide to keep the child, there's going to be some complication, and Maggie knows that, so that's what happens. The third, Eddie's story arc is basically rekindling his relationship with Dakota, to be a hypocrite and get some pills. When the last time we saw Dakota, Eddie kicked her out because of her, drug issues. But in this episode, Eddie is being a hypocrite, as I said, which is why it's a little bit complicated. Number 10, Not Alone, episode 15. The last 10 are really really good. In my opinion, I enjoyed all of them. It was really hard to decide which episodes goes where, but let's start with this episode. This episode has multiple arcs, where Sophie is, after learning the fact that she wasn't the only one the tutor sexually assaulted or harassed, Sophie goes into this vengeance mode. Maggie telling Sophie to move on and you get some help, but no. What Sophie does is she visits the parents of the person who committed suicide because of the tutor, and tries to talk to them like a friend. But then in the end, the parents find out that she really didn't know her. She didn't know her, yeah, basically. And the parents have a hard time accepting that their children or their daughter was sexually assaulted by the tutor, Peter. And but the father does, in the end, come through and gives her a diary to Maggie when Sophie forgot her wallet in the house on purpose, in my opinion. Yeah, that's what happens for them. The other storyline is Eddie and Catherine's custody battle. Eddie knows that Catherine is not gonna let them have a joint custody because of the fact that Eddie fell off the wagons this season, and Eddie is talking to the lawyer, and this is a very hard thing because Eddie cannot. He's in a wheelchair, and he knows they can't support Theo by himself. So Gary makes a really really good suggestion in the end of the episode, a very heartwarming one, where Gary says, I'll move back into my apartment with Eddie so that Eddie can have supervision with Theo, while Eddie can see Theo while I supervise them, which is a really nice thing for a friend to do. And then the other aspect is the project that Tyrell and Rome started about making a documentary about Black Lives Matter. And this one's great, where Rome and Tyrell are bonding even more like a father and son kind of relationship, where Rome teaches Tyrell the techniques to create a documentary, but also to allow Tyrell to pursue this passion about the Black Lives Matter and creating a documentary from it. Number 9, Junior. This episode is very important for Danny and also Gary, where their storyline intertwines in the middle, and it's really nice storyline in my opinion. For Danny is struggling because of the fact that he hasn't come out to the school yet, and Danny is deciding whether he should or he shouldn't. And the fact that Danny, one of his classmates, made a joke that he's on a date with this other guy in class, made him feel uncomfortable because of the fact that it is true that he's gay, but he's not in a relationship with that other guy. They're just good friends, you know. Um, Meanwhile, Gary is having a has a surprise visitor from his father, where they have a contentious relationship, and since Gary's father is very, old school, and he's like he has this mindset that's not in the normal he that isn't in the normal sense, where um where when he sees John's picture, he says, "How long has it been gone?" A month and a half, and um, Gary's father says maybe he didn't love his family or something, and Gary does defend John to his core, saying that I will not let you tell that to his son, son, and it's a very nice moment for them, for Gary to protect Danny. But by the middle of the episode, Danny is struggling to whether to come out at school or not, and Gary's father gives him a speech, or a story that he had in Vietnam, and encourages him that maybe it's a good thing for you to come out, which allows Danny to come out at school, which is a really really nice step for Danny. But it's a nice gesture where we didn't know Gary's father, but Gary's father is has some very good advice, and it's a very nice thing Gary's father did for Danny. Yeah. By the end of the episode, Danny comes out, obviously, and they're watching clips from Gary's old life, and we learn that his name was Javier before he changed it to Gary. We don't know why he changed it, but we'll see. The other storyline in this episode is mainly Eddie and Catherine. Eddie's trying to wow Catherine with this dinner, which Catherine cancels, and Eddie knows that Catherine is with Alan, and their relationship is in a downfall, which he does learn at the end of the episode, where Eddie is having a hard. Catherine is asking for a divorce. Asked Eddie for a divorce. It's a very sad thing, because they just renewed their vows in the beginning of the season. Number 8, Writing on the Wall, episode 2. This is right after the season premiere, and obviously there's some changes. Obviously, the first change is Eddie is now in a wheelchair, and Catherine going to work and Theo not being at the house means Eddie cannot move his feet, so he's basically stuck on this chair because he forgot to get the wheelchair because it's in the other it's on the other side of the house, and he can't reach it. And Gary is, he's feeling helpless on knowing that I can't help this guy who has been there for me, and his life is a little bit different now. So what Gary does is, ask help and from Darcy, because she's a physical therapist, and Gary learns that the one thing Eddie can't do is get back to daily routines. So they played basketball every Friday, so that's what they do, where Gary brings Eddie to the basketball court, and they do try to play, but Eddie has some adjustment to do, and Eddie is getting really angry at Gary for, why are you doing this to me? And Gary's saying, I'm trying to help you, but Eddie doesn't understand that he's trying to help him. So by the end of the episode, Eddie manages to score a hoop in the basket with his wheelchair, and he finally accepts his wheelchair, but he also accepts that he can't do the things he can. He just have to adjust and do it in a different way, which is really nice. The other aspect of this is Sophie's arc, where before getting sexually assaulted by her tutor, she visits Harvard, his John's school, university, and since a kid from she's a kid who has she's a kid of John's, they think that everyone knows that Sophie's gonna get in, which makes her uh, change her life choices where she decides not to go to the school instead of going because of the fact that it's hard to um, because she doesn't want to be this legacy kid in Harvard. So instead, she decides, I want to go to her dream school, which leads to her storyline in of being sexually assaulted. Number 7, The Price of Admissions, Episode 8. This episode tackles the difficulties of Asian hate because of COVID-19. And although this episode is hard to talk about, the other aspects in this episode makes it a little bit easier to talk about. Basically, Theo, being the smart kid he is, he um, is very careful about not getting COVID by putting his mask on. He's having schools from his house, but his neighbor is, really anti-Asian, and when Theo accidentally enters his garden, Theo is nearly attacked. So what Eddie does is use his hockey stick to smash the neighbor's car, which he gets in really, really big trouble. The factor meaning he's on drugs or painkillers, so he's using drugs and he's hitting someone's car, which is not so good in many scenarios. This episode also has Catherine and Alan discussing about these things, and their relationship becomes more closer and closer, which in turn leads to them having a relationship. By the end of the episode, Eddie comes clean to Roman and Gary about his drug issues, and Gary is really mad at Eddie. Says, "I was right there for you. You could have come to me." And it's true, Eddie could have come to Gary. Gary is the one person you could always trust with fixing stuff, and it's really, really hard to for Gary and Rome to accept that Eddie has been keeping this secret from them, and it's a really hard thing for Eddie to admit, which is why I'm a little bit proud of him. Yet I am still disappointed that he smashed a car. This episode also have Gary meeting Jamie for the first time. Obviously, Gary and Jamie both had a relationship with Maggie, so it's only obvious that they meet at one point, obviously. Number 6, Letting Go, Episode 3. This episode finally solves the mystery of what happened to Alex Stewart, who Eddie believes drowned because of him, and that's why he got into the car accident, because he was at the place where the lake was. Eddie is finally confronted by the Reverend, who tells him the truth about what happened the night Alex died and how she overdosed, and instead of ruining her sister's career too, they make it look like a suicide or drowning by putting her in the water. It's a very sad ending, but Eddie gets some closure that he didn't do it. But there's the other aspect of, why am I in this wheelchair when I didn't do anything to Alex? It's this, double-edged sword where she knows that he didn't do anything, but then now he feels betrayed by the fact that he was hit by the car. He also learns what happened right after he was hit by the car, where the Reverend tells Eddie that he did try to chase the car, but he couldn't catch up with the car. This episode also explores Gary and Danny's relationship, where Danny is having have a bully who's keep bullying Danny, and Gary gives him the advice to talk to the bully instead of fight or run away. And Danny learns that the bully also lost his father, and they rekindle they become closer friends, which is why in Junior, that's the guy that the girl thought that they were dating, even though they were not. They were just friends. Number 5, non-essentials, episode 5. This episode's the episode right after. It's the uh, winter premiere, I guess, where it premieres this year, 2021. This episode's very crucial, where COVID starts hitting and there's a lockdown, which causes Rome's movie to be cancelled, which is a really, really sad thing. But it's understandable, but it's not understandable at the same time. The other aspect of this episode that's very interesting is um, the history of John's final phone call. We learn who was in the other end of the phone call. Alan, as I've been mentioning a lot, was the last person to talk to John. Catherine learns that the restaurant might be getting closed because of the fact that they didn't ask the landowner to use the top floor as a building, as an office for Catherine's law practice. And Catherine talks to the lawyer Alan, who learns that John's last deal he made with the restaurant building was for his friends, not a business deal that he was doing. And Alan decides to accept that, honor John's wishes, and keep the restaurant running, which is a really, really nice thing to do. Unlike all of others John's friends who suffered from the death of John, Alan's suffering is a little bit different because of the fact that Alan has the guilt of thinking that he could have said something that could have changed his mind of committing suicide because he was the last person to talk to. So Alan had this guilt in his gut that he couldn't save John. So I will do this one. I'm gonna honor him by doing this one wish, which is very honorable for Alan. And by the end of the episode, the restaurant is saved, but Rome's movie is canceled. But everyone decides to support Rome by having the table read he never had with his chosen castmates, and have his friends read the part that they are meant to have, not that read the part that they are, because it is based on everyone. Number 4, The Lost Sheep, episode 9. This episode takes right after episode 8, where Eddie tells Rome and Gary about his addiction and promising to come out to Catherine, which he does, which really, really disappoints Catherine. And by the time Catherine and Eddie tells Theo blames Catherine instead of Eddie. And by this episode, Eddie does decide to go to rehab, and meets many people that supports him, but also tries to help him. Meanwhile, Catherine, being really angry, talks to Alan, and confides in Alan, which leads Catherine to kissing Alan, and Alan backs off a little bit. It's very, very hard, complicated factor to comprehend. This episode also is the final scene of Jamie, or the final episode Jamie is in, where after Maggie gets the abortion, Jamie decides to go back to England. So yes, goodbye, Jamie. And when Eddie goes to the rehab and has a FaceTime with Theo. Theo is afraid that Eddie is not going to get better again, which makes Eddie more determined to get out of rehab faster and faster. Number 3, Hit and Run, Episode 1. Yes, the season premiere of the show. It's a really, really nice premiere where we learn exactly what happened to Eddie. Eddie is hit by a car, and a car takes off, and calls 911, and that's revealed to be the reference car in Episode 3. But Catherine's really worried, and and Eddie is helicoptered to the hospital, Boston General, and that's where everyone in the group meets. Everyone's having some difficulty. Well, Regina and Rome is having some difficulty because they lost a baby, so they're having a slightly difficult time talking to each other. Delilah, goes with Catherine, while Theo stays over with Sophie and Danny. And everyone in Darcy, Gary, and Maggie is off to England, so she doesn't know what happened. But Catherine tells of the story of what happened at the lake house, and Theo, and it's a really, really hard moment for everyone. Gary also has Gary has one of the best moments in this episode where Gary talks to the unconscious Eddie, saying, "I know that most of this time, most people should allow their loved ones who are in a coma to move on, but Gary says you cannot move on. You have Charlie, you have Catherine, and you have Theo, and you have me to look after." So it's a really, really nice, touching scene where Gary doesn't want Eddie to move on. The good thing is Eddie does wake up, and but the bad thing is he can't feel his legs. This is the arc of his addiction, but he's at the beginning he did not taking any painkiller because he says, I'm sober for 10 years, so I'm not going to take any. This episode has a time jump too, 3 months to be exact, where Eddie spends his time in the hospital for 3 months, and then he finally comes home with Catherine wanting to renew their vows in the backyard, which Eddie accepts, and Eddie and Catherine renews their vows, which is really, really nice. Number 2, No One Is to Blame, Episode 16. This episode has one of the most emotional moments in the season, where Sophie pays Rome a visit, knowing that Rome is the only person who has experienced trying to commit suicide. So Sophie asked the question of why he wanted to kill himself, and the response was, he felt that his world was becoming darker and darker, and he felt hopeless. But the speech that Rome gives to Sophie about the fact that there were 2 persons who was supposed to die on the day John died, and one of them survived. And Rome says that after that he did learn that sky does become bluer or better, and that if Sophie needs to talk to Rome, you just don't knock my door, you knock down my door, which is a very emotional fact where Sophie and Rome feels guilty, but Rome also do care about Sophie, so there's this connection between them now that's really, really, really nice. This episode's the first episode where Eddie's finally able to see Theo with Gary as the supervisor, and it's a really nice moment where Theo finally is able to spend time with Eddie, playing video games and other stuff. But Eddie, being determined to make this the perfect weekend, decides to buy this video game that's sold out in most shops except for one, which he finds. But then he has some difficulty getting a Uber Uber driver to take him because of the fact that he's in a wheelchair. In the end, he asks Regina to takes him, which is nice for the group, you know. But at the end of the episode, the sad thing is Darcy and tells Gary that she has to move because of the fact that her son's father wants to spend more time with him, which means to move, which means he wants to move. But their agreement was that they both have to move closer so that they can be closer to so that the father can be closer to his son. Which makes Gary very disappointed because of the fact that their relationship is just getting started, and but they're gonna try this long distance relationship thing, which most of the time doesn't work, as I've been told. Number 1, Justice, episode 17 and 18. Yes, the 2-hour season finale of A Million Little Things, season 3, was amazing. Obviously, I knew the show was going to continue for season 4 with 20 episodes after this, so I knew that there was going to be some kind of a shocking moment, which they succeeded, in my opinion. In the beginning of the episode, Delilah finally returns. You know, Delilah returns, which is a good thing. You know, you need Delilah to, you know, make the show of A Million Little Things whole. But the fantastic part was she was there for Sophie when Sophie decides to report the crime of her sexual assault to the police. But while at the police station, Sophie is interrogated questioned very, very harshly, and you know Delilah is really mad at the detective, but everyone's most people doesn't like the police due to the Black Lives Matter event during that time, but the detective has a little bit of a heart in as DJ explains it, where the detective knew that the lawyer was gonna question Sophie as hard as they did. So if Sophie can't take that kind of of questioning, then the detective wants Sophie to mentally move on, and instead of getting the perpetrators punished, the detective wants to keep the sanity of these victims, basically, which is a really nice thing for the detective. Meanwhile, Eddie and Catherine's divorce is becoming more clear and clear, but the good thing is, the bad thing is Catherine, even perfect person, does have some accidents where Theo goes to the hospital of cutting his hand because of the fact that they were cooking. Now Eddie has this leverage against Catherine, but instead of using it, what he does is make a proposal of joint custody with him taking a drug test every week to make sure that he's sober. So this relationship becomes more at a neutral stand by the end of the episode, which is really nice. The other part of the episode is after reporting to the police and failing, Delilah decides that they want to bring Sophie and Danny to Paris to have a new start. And this is when Gary and Delilah gets into a fight, which never happens, where Gary says, "Where were you when Danny was struggling to come out? Where were you when Sophie got sexually assaulted?" Danny questions the validity of this moving to a different, to Paris, and Sophie is not happy. Danny isn't happy, and by the end of Gary's ranting to Delilah, Delilah does start to break down, and by the end of the episode, she's broken, in my opinion, which is why it's nice to see that Danny does comfort Delilah to make sure that Delilah doesn't do anything crazy. Roman Regina's story is one of the happiest out of the all, other than Eddie and Catherine's, joint custody, where they finally decide to adopt Tyrell for good, Tyrell, and they are celebrating, which they're good. It's a happy ending, except the fact that the restaurant broke and decides to shut it to close the restaurant, which is the sad part. But they have a good ending, so I don't mind. But the shocking final, yes, I'm gonna start talking about that now. Where one of them is Eddie gets a phone call from this stranger who says, "I'm the person who hit you," and this sparks the investigation of who hit Eddie again. But the most shocking part is after Gary pays a visit to his father for dinner and questions if his father was mad at Gary for changing his name from Javier to Gary. He does something really, really shocking where he goes over to the tutor's house and sneaks behind the door, and when the tutor opens the door, he puts a bag over the tutor's head and drags him into the house. And we don't know what Gary did to the person, but it's not something that is good, honestly. So that's the shocking ending, which is much shocking than what happened to Eddie getting hit by a car. Thank you for watching, and I'll promise to do more uploads, so I'll see you next Sunday for another review episode. Please subscribe and like this video, and please share it with all your friends, and also our podcast YouTube channel.